Thank you all for being here. 2 Nobel Prizes in 1 week. How about that? It says here I'm supposed to welcome you first. I apologize for blurting out, but you get a call or a text at 3 a.m. and look, I'm going to be honest. I thought maybe I won the Nobel, but I don't do chemistry or physics, so that faded fast. I couldn't be more proud, naturally, of our colleagues. And when you think about, many of you have met Omar Yagi and John Clark, obviously towering scholars. They're wonderful people. They're just wonderful people. And people that are attracted to this remarkable public university, they are different. And, like this sort of confidence without attitude. I was mentioning to somebody earlier, I'm obviously off script, but somebody asked me recently a question I've never been asked before, and that was, what's the hardest leadership lesson to teach? That's a really neat question. And what came out of my mouth is like keeping your ego in check. It's just hard. And when you're that toweringly smart, it can get the better of you. And it has not got the better of these two wonderful scholars and people. Okay, get on script, man. There is no better time to celebrate a book that highlights the connection between our research excellence and this thriving startup ecosystem. In the last 2 days, we had these two wonderful faculty members that won their Nobel. Omar Yagi, the winner today in chemistry, created what are called metal organic frameworks, or MOFs as they are called, that can be used for a variety of purposes. You probably heard some of this today, including capturing carbon dioxide from the air, or from power plants, for example, that are producing carbon dioxide. That research, in fact, influenced a startup featured in tonight's book, highlighting the tangible link between groundbreaking research and successful ventures that translate our research into solutions for addressing the world's biggest opportunities and challenges. You can think of these MOFs as like, how do you take in like a sugar cube space and create as much surface area as possible? Think of these as like designer sponges. It's like they've got all these little cavities, and it's like it can capture carbon molecules perfectly, or H2O, or water, or methane. And it's like designer to capture what you want to capture. And it's just so precise that you can design it for what molecule you want to capture. So that's some of the work that Omar has done. And you probably read and heard about John Clark. So I won't go through both of them. I just want to, they are quintessentially Berkeley in just so many ways. It was the dean of the mathematical and physical sciences, Steve Kahn. Many of you know him. And it's like, at Berkeley, we just ask bigger questions. And I think, that's kind of easy to say, but it's really true. There are a lot of great universities that just don't have many Nobels behind them. And part of it is that I hate to say this, but it's, you gotta get out there. You gotta reach. You gotta say, this is like crazy, and I'm going here. And then you gotta be tenacious, right? All right, 3 weeks ago, PitchBook announced that UC Berkeley ranked #1 in 3 areas: the most startups founded by undergraduate alums, the most founders, and the most female-founded companies. So how about a round of, that's a good thing. It is the 3rd year in a row that we have topped these rankings, surpassing Stanford, Harvard, and MIT along the way. That's quite a feat for a university that has long been perceived, let's be honest, as, at least historically, a bit wary of the private sector and focused solely on fundamental research. And that idea that fundamental research and translational research, getting stuff into society, are complements rather than substitutes, to use the jargon of my field, economics. That's quite a gestalt shift, and it has really occurred here at Berkeley, and you're going to hear more about that. The fact is that our embrace of innovation and entrepreneurship, including a cultural embrace, could not be more consistent with our public mission and values, right? Is this the right mission consistent or mission advancing thing for a great public research university to be doing? That is really not questioned anymore. particularly a long-standing disregard for the status quo that we have here at Berkeley, right? I mean, I could be the chancellor or president of any great university up here, and I could, if I said to you, I mean, imagine, look, the Ivy League is obviously, we've got 8 great universities that are part of the Ivy League. But a president of an Ivy League university that stands up in front of you and says, this Ivy League university, we're all about questioning the status quo. It's sort of like, it's kind of not where institutionally they come from, right? Now, the scholars at those universities question the status quo every day. That's obviously true. They're great scholars. Those are great universities. But that's not where those universities come from. It's not their reputation. It's not their brand. And, you know, when we say that about Berkeley, people say, well, what else you got? Well, it's kind of course that's it, right? But then there's also, part of that is there's got to be a better way to do this. Questioning the status quo, that mindset, there's got to be a better way to do this. I've been around a lot of really smart people who do not naturally think there's got to be a better way to do this. That's not just one-to-one with intelligence. And this idea of there's got to be a better way to do this is part of what's powering this ecosystem and why Berkeley's so darn distinctive. So if this sounds like just another unobjectionable value that everybody says and does, it's like, it isn't. It actually isn't. That's part of the magic of the place. As the needs of our students and society rapidly change, and as the relevance and contributions of higher education are being questioned, never has it been more important that innovation and entrepreneurship take an even stronger hold at Berkeley. That's my view. I suspect most of you share that. This evolutionary change is giving our students and faculty an ever more important role in translating research discoveries into the services, inventions, and technologies that support the health, prosperity, and security of the American people. You know, indeed, it was Raka Ray, who's the dean of our social sciences. She said to me the other day, you know, the U.S., America, because some people have said these universities, you know, you're not pro-America enough. I heard that from a senator not long ago, a U.S. senator, and it's one of those phrases where it's like, thank you for, you know, speaking clearly about how some universities are perceived, and the idea of, and what Raka Dean Ray said, she said, you know, America is a superpower because of higher education. And that's one way to connect some things that I think haven't been connected as much by many people. This is also giving our students a significant boost, this effort to connect ourselves to entrepreneurship and innovation even further. Recent research shows that Berkeley now lifts more students further up the household income ladder than any other U.S. university. I think that just is. And if you want the citation, because you're an empiricist the way I am, just Google mobility report cards and look at table 4. Okay, enough. The return on the cost of their attendance investment has jumped 30% in the last 10 years. You know, so when people say we've got a confidence and trust problem in higher ed, usually they say it's coming from 3 sources: cost, careers, and culture, right? And we can talk an awful lot about all 3 of those. That's not what tonight is about. But we've got good answers at Berkeley for all 3 of those elements. And we need to get even sharper in the way we talk about them. So when we say go Bears, we mean it, okay? I know you all know that. But all right, the book and our panelists. Rich, get to the content. The content is to my right over here, and we're going to have a wonderful conversation. We're celebrating this remarkable evolution and launch of the book that most of you have in front of you, Startup Campus. It was co-conceived and led by Laura Hassner. Laura, can you shake? Okay, right over there. Laura Hassner. Laura is the executive director of innovation and entrepreneurship, and also the heads the Berkeley Changemaker Initiative and program, for those of you that have been involved in that. It was fundamentally edited and conceived, and much of it written by Mike Alvarez Cohen. Is Mike here tonight? There we go. Mike has played a fundamental role for many years, decades really, in thinking about how do we evolve this ecosystem. We're all indebted to him in a fundamental way. He is the director of innovation ecosystem development. That was true even before the role that I had before my current role. He had that role. And the book itself had contributions from nearly 100 faculty, staff, and alums, right? So those those chapters that you will read or have read were joint efforts in every sense of the word. The book explores how campus innovators built an ecosystem that has led to hundreds of new businesses and ventures every year. The book was funded entirely by philanthropy, which is kind of interesting because you might imagine, what made you write a book? I think if the philanthropy hadn't come in, and the person who gave us this lovely gift is in the room, I don't think we would have thought of producing the book. That's actually quite interesting. So this was a gift that came in that said, here's a dollop of money, and it was a significant dollop of money. Solely, I want you to pull a team together to tell Berkeley's story more powerfully externally around innovation and entrepreneurship. That's like a new category of gift. That's a lovely gift. And I don't think we would have thought to write the book. So it's not like, oh, we spent all of that money on Google AdWords. It's sort of like, let's think of something bigger and better. And not to take away from Google AdWords, but that's what got sparked by that gift. It's a lovely gift. All right. So the students and faculty and staff that were involved, of course, have a free copy, and you do too. So I am actually gonna call out the donor here. I hope he doesn't mind. Matt Levin is the person that and the Tipping Point Fund. He made not just the book possible, but many other things as well. And for those of you that want to kind of get on that train of telling our innovation and entrepreneurship story, we're not done yet. So we call it the Project Tipping Point, and there's a fund behind it. So anyways, if you're interested in jumping on that train, let me know. I also want to thank the Berkeley Frontier Fund for its generous support of this evening's celebration. So and it's one of our shared carry funds and a very important partner to the university, the Berkeley Frontier Fund. Let me introduce our panelists and we'll get to it. Steve Blank, immediately to my right here, pioneered the customer development model at the heart of the lean entrepreneurship movement. And that's a huge movement that everybody who's in this space has heard of. He's taught at Stanford, UC Berkeley, Columbia, NYU, UCSF, and Imperial College. And there are many other things I could say about him. He's an absolute leader in this field. We're super happy to have him. Also, Brooke Byers is just on the other end over there, co-founder of Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield and Byers, and a venture capital pioneer, and many of you know about Brooke, and many of you know Brooke personally. Jennifer Doudna, the Li Ka-shing Chancellor's Chair in Biomedical and Health Sciences, and the 2020 co-winner of the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. That was for her invention of CRISPR-Cas9, a genome editing technology. And I think one of the quick elements there, and John Clark made this point as well, the physics prize, it's sort of like, it's not like you can see every translational, every application. It's like, I want to understand the mechanism. I want to understand how this works. Okay. And then you figure out how it works. It's like, oh my gosh, there are a million things that this could imply. And that's the magic of fundamental science. And you don't know when you're going to hit that moment, that rich vein. But Jennifer certainly did, and so did these other prize winners, and many wonderful things will come from it. Dave Schaefer, friend and colleague, a professor of chemical and biomolecular engineering, holds the Distinguished Baker Bioingenuity Hub Directorship, so he's been running BBH, as we call it, and many other things on campus. So we're gonna dive in here, and I've got a few sections of our comments, and then we'll make sure there's some time for Q&A from all of you. I'll turn this on and move over here. So the first part is biographical, and these are kind of just give us a little sense for what you've been up to and where you're coming from. And I'm going to start with Brooke here. Let's start with introducing yourself. Brooke, you've been a venture capital investor since the 1970s. You've been closely involved in helping to build more than 60 new technology-based companies. What led you to your specialization in biotech and to your support of ventures born also out of UC Berkeley faculty and alums? Please, Brooke, thank you for being here. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. So why did I specialize in biotech? Well, early on in venture capital in the 1970s, when I got into it, everybody was a generalist. You had to understand semiconductors, computers, networking, materials science, chemistry. I'm not that smart. So I decided to focus on one thing, and I was lucky. I got in there at the in the late 1970s at the birth time of biotech, and we seed funded Genentech and a bunch of other companies, and got lucky. And I've surfed that since then. I did do a couple of other companies in the other spaces. I was involved in funding and helping to build Electronic Arts, which made me a hero to my sons because I would come home with the latest products in computer gaming. Berkeley. So Berkeley is it's no surprise with the startup data that's come out about it, because the Berkeley uses its size to its advantage. And the multidisciplinary nature of the campus, which has been that way for a long time, makes for better entrepreneurs, because they don't think of just their natural siloed area. They might be in comp sci, but they got exposed to other things around the campus, especially in the past 10, 15 years when Rich and others have not pioneered, but really pushed entrepreneurship on the campus. Entrepreneurship exists in every department here. In most universities, it's just in the business school and the computer science, but not here. In Berkeley, it's all around. So I made a list of the companies that my firm has backed out of founders from Berkeley. Coursera, DoorDash, Enphase, Databricks, LM Arena, Revo, Transversal, and Sun Microsystems, which was founded when Bill Joy here developed Unix, the first open source software system. And then there was another Berkeley alum who had a big effect on everything that's changed all of our lives. There was a company, I'm going to see if you can guess who it is, that was founded by two PhDs down south of here, and the company is now valued at $3 trillion, but it wouldn't be there if it weren't for the CEO who got his PhD in comp sci here. Who was that? Eric Schmidt. That's right.
Thank you very much, Brooke, for that. And so we're going to turn to Steve Blank here. Maybe, Steve, could you tell us how you moved from being an entrepreneur yourself to the teaching of entrepreneurship? And what is this lean startup movement? And how does the model of customer development you created help define that, please?
Well, thanks, Rich. That usually takes me a semester to describe to my students. So I promise you I'll try to do the short version. So as some of you know, I did 8 startups in Silicon Valley: supercomputers, semiconductors, electronic design automation. Brooke doesn't remember, but he was on the board of MIPS when I was there with Hennessy and Masuris and the rest. But when I retired, I finally got time to think about the nature of innovation entrepreneurship. When you're a practitioner, your head is down and you're just focused on staying alive. But I started to think about the fact that in the 20th century, investors, Brooke and the entire community, were basically telling us that startups were nothing more than smaller versions of large companies. Everything they did, we did: 5-year plans, business plans, etc., without realizing that no business plan survives first contact with customers. And in fact, no one had ever observed, or at least articulated, that the difference was large companies execute known business models, but startups search for them. And we had built 100 years of tools for execution in Harvard and McKinsey and whatever. We had no tools. We didn't even have the language for search. And I got lucky that Jerry Engel, who's standing here at Haas Business School, took me literally off the street and said, would you like to co-teach? And then you would like to teach. And then I, crazy enough to say, no, I want to create a whole new class with this whole new idea. And he said, okay, this is ground zero for modern entrepreneurship. Yeah. Not invention. Berkeley has been inventing since the 1930s in creating Nobel Prize winner after Nobel Prize winner. But this idea of commercialization, as you call the translational stuff, that's new as a practice, right? No decent researcher ever thought of I want to start a company. Now that's a thing, right? I mean, Jennifer, you're like Caribou and Mammoth and whatever. Those are kind of built into the DNA, and our contribution, at least part of mine and Jerry's and all you should be proud of, we built the first solid piece of methodology for founders and startups to think about how do you actually go about building a startup on top of your invention?
And you did it
Yeah.
here.
What was your question?
And you did it here. No, I think that is quite remarkable. I mean, I also loved the phrase, Steve. You mentioned, that thinking about the nature of entrepreneurship, right? And so, I'll transition to Jennifer and David. But that idea of I want to understand the mechanism. I mean, that's the great scientists think about that as fundamentally as I can, like first principles. I'm going to grind it right into the core. But you did that actually with what we think of as a quite applied field, and this idea of customer discovery and the search for business models. People weren't. Now we take that for granted, but people weren't thinking that way back then, and it really did start here and propagated from that. So we'll go to you, Jennifer, first, and then to David. So both of you scholars and many other things in your lives. Talk to us a bit about your primary research interests and how you've parlayed those into startups, what your company or companies aim to achieve. Jennifer first.
It's a real pleasure to be here, Rich, and hi, everybody. I have been working on fundamental science since, about 31 years ago when I started my lab at Yale. And then I was recruited here to Berkeley in 2002. And boy, am I glad I came. Woo! I loved Yale, but I want to lean into what Brooke said earlier about Berkeley being a big, diverse campus that leverages that to its advantage. And that absolutely happened in spades for me, because when I came here, I got introduced to lots of interesting colleagues, including Jill Banfield, who studies microbes, and our research was very different, but we realized we had a common interest in a very obscure possibility at the time, which was that bacteria might have an adaptive immune system, and it might use the kind of molecule that I had been studying called RNA. And so when we got together and had that very first conversation, the sparks went off, and I realized this was a very interesting area of biology. Nobody was really working on it at the time. And I recruited some fantastic Berkeley students, some of them undergraduates, some of them graduate students, and a couple of postdocs who came in and worked on this very crazy question of whether bacteria could evolve their own defense against viral infection. And it was through studying that process, studying a pathway called CRISPR, that we figured out not only how it worked, but also how it could be applied in some very interesting areas. And so, as you alluded to, Rich, that ultimately led me to do something I never thought I would do in my career, which is to start not just one, but now multiple companies, and to do that by enabling students and trainees that were coming out of my lab here at Berkeley to become entrepreneurs, to be founders of companies, to become leaders of companies. I'm very proud of some of our female leaders of some of those companies in particular, and to really just figure out how to do something that none of us had any training to do. It would have been great if you were, if I had been able to take your class at the time, but and now we're at a place in the field where, believe it or not, it's never been more exciting. There's more opportunities all the time. We're seeing the real world implications of genome editing, being able to make targeted changes to DNA in human cells, in human patients that have disease, also in plants and in ways that are in microbes that are going to affect the climate. So some of those things are things that I hope to do with Dave and through our partnership with the Baker Bioingenuity Hub, which I'm sure you will tell us about.
Thank you for that, Jennifer. Just a quick, we'll turn to Dave now, but I just one quick thought about, this idea of fundamental and translational research complements or substitutes. It's actually a really fundamental cultural question in universities. And part of what she just mentioned is, if you think, well, Jennifer's now doing translational work and starting companies, it's sort of like graduate students, postdocs, they're people, she's still doing fundamental science, right? So the idea that, there's this opportunity cost because Jennifer's spending too much time building companies, it's sort of like, that's not the model, right? There are a bunch of people that can do that work, and Jennifer can continue at the frontier. That's part of why this works so well. I just wanted to underscore that because it's easily missed, I think. Dave Schaefer, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rich, and thrilled to be here with all of you today. So I got to Berkeley around 1999. I've been here now for over a quarter century and thrilled to absolutely make this my home. So my own research is related to gene and cell therapies. So the idea is that small molecules, which are the basis of a lot of pharmaceuticals, a lot of drugs that are on the market, and RNA, which is the basis of for example, the COVID vaccine, those are very, very powerful modalities for being able to treat disease. But I was always inspired by the idea that you could treat at the level of DNA. And so if you add a new gene to the genome, that's a gene therapy. Jennifer invented the most incredible way ever of being able to edit or change the sequence of a gene in the genome. That's genome editing. And if you add an entire new genome to a tissue, that's a cell therapy. So I was always very interested in overcoming barriers and enabling clinical success in those therapeutic modalities, especially gene and cell therapy. So I came into this as an engineer. I'm a chemical and bioengineer by background. We love problems. We love tough problems, like to solve them. And I never imagined I was going to be involved in starting a company. Really, the first half of my career, I was building technologies to solve problems and lower barriers to clinical success in those areas. So about 2012 or 2013, started talking about forming a company. And I always thought that I wanted to get our technologies into clinical development, but I thought I was going to license them to my mother. She was an MD who ran phase 3 clinical trials for Novartis and for Sanofi. She got drugs approved. But for these new modern technologies, the large drug companies didn't really know how to develop them. And so we started getting the technologies into startup companies. And so I caught the bug in about 2012 after forming the first company. So I've spun 7 companies out of our lab now.
Yeah.
So these have either gone public, been acquired, or are private and growing. 3 of them have been in another organization I'll tell you about in a moment. But the reason for doing that was exactly what I mentioned a moment ago. I view these companies as vehicles to be able to get innovation and technologies into human clinical development where they can try to make a difference for human health. And it's been a long path, but our technologies by the end of this calendar year are going to be are being used in 6 phase 3 human clinical trials, meaning that we're getting close to FDA approvals, which has always been a dream for my entire career.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks, Dave. And, I think also part of it, let me just, this is going back to like the 10,000 foot level, but if somebody said, why does Berkeley exist? I mean, what is its mission? And the traditional way to think about that is 3 things, right? Research, teaching, and service, public service. Right? But if you sort of said, no, let's start with why. Is that the deep why? Those are the profoundly important hows. The deep why is long-term societal benefit. Because if you said the deep why is research, teaching, and service, you could say, well, does this fit into service? And can we have a discussion on whether this is the kind of service we're really talking about? But if you instead said, no, the deep why is long-term societal benefit, and this absolutely contributes to that. There's no question that what we're talking about here is mission advancing for this great university, right? And the idea that these great scientists want to have an impact on the world, that's a good thing. And that we know how to do that, right? So I just want to get back to the mission level, right? When we talk about mission and values, I think that's part of why people had some cognitive dissonance 20 years ago. It's sort of like, is this really lined up with the mission? But if you start with why in the right way, it's very, very clear. Okay, could I go back to you, and then we'll go into some more kind of current landscape stuff. We'll turn back to Brooke, but maybe Jennifer, if I could ask you the question, sort of impediments that sort of early on in terms of company creation or getting your stuff into the world, and maybe a few of the things at Berkeley that you've been able to take advantage of.
Gosh, where do I start? It was a long list because, well, like you, Dave, I didn't have any experience as an entrepreneur myself. I really knew nothing about starting a company. And for me, the beginning was when a graduate student, Rachel Horowitz, who's featured in this book, said, who was in my lab at the time and was doing some of the early work on CRISPR biology in our group, said to me, I think CRISPR is going to be incredibly useful, and I wonder if we should start a company. And that was a, shocking idea at the time for me. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought it made a lot of sense. And she'd actually been taking classes on the side at Haas Business School. And I found out, and she was quite. I'm sure she did. I'm sure she did. And so she ended up founding Caribou Biosciences with me, and we ended up licensing out of Berkeley some of that very early CRISPR technology that turned out to be so useful for genome editing, as you mentioned, Dave, and for doing cell and gene therapy in humans and all sorts of other interesting things. So it was a great journey. Along the way, gosh, I mean, there were so many crazy things that happened. There were patent fights that you may be aware of. That was, a crazy journey. And there were all of the kind of issues that go into starting a new business and trying to figure out how to structure it, how to decide what to focus on. That was actually a big challenge that we had. There were so many things to do. It was almost a problem, which thing or things should we focus on? And along the way, we had some really good guidance from a number of faculty members here. I think I talked to you, Dave, early on about this, as well as some other colleagues here that were able to give me good guidance themselves or point me in the right direction when I needed it. That being said, I did realize that there could have been a smoother path if somebody like me had access to the right resources. And this was what was so wonderful when the QB3 program started now quite a few years ago. But one of the goals of that program, if anyone remembers this, is that the state of California said, we want to make sure that the University of California is able to take innovation and smoothly translate it. And that sometimes that means building companies, and we should make that easier for people like us to do. And so they put in place a program that I think was called Startup in a Box that made it very easy to, get companies going. It was incredibly useful for some of the later things that we ended up doing. And now we have a number of resources on the campus. One, of course, is the Baker Bioingenuity Hub, which has become an extraordinary opportunity for our entrepreneurs to not only place their companies physically, but also get access to experts, to get access to equipment, to be adjacent to this campus where there's all of this exciting work going on. It's been an incredible opportunity for several of our companies that have ended up at the Baker Bioingenuity Hub. And I have to mention, I can't not mention, that one of the things that happened along the way was that I had the good fortune to work with a former dean of ours, Steve Martin, originally, who had the vision to help me found the Innovative Genomics Institute, along with a lot of help from other colleagues, Bob Tejan, who's here, Michael Bachin, who helped a lot, who also was, very instrumental in getting the institute going. And of course, I couldn't not mention Brooke Byers, who also gave us incredibly helpful advice, especially for hiring a wonderful executive director who's now in place and is a real powerhouse. And that institute is now a 3 UC campus institute. We hope to bring in another one soon. My vision is to build a partnership with our sister campuses across California to build an absolutely unstoppable entrepreneurial pipeline for all of the innovations that are coming out of our universities and out of our wonderful students. And we need to help those students start companies. At the IGI, we've now spun out 27 companies, and many have gone public. They've been acquired. We've created more than 2,000 jobs here in the state of California. We've raised billions of dollars in funding, and we've, launched countless sort of ideas and technologies. Some of those are in healthcare, but some of them are in other areas. Synthetic biology, we hope to partner with Dave on some of the ideas that you're developing in the materials space. I think that would be very exciting. And the sky's the limit. And I wouldn't have been able to do any of this anywhere else.
Yeah, hear, hear. Thank you. Thank you for that, Jennifer. And I think, a couple quick things. We use the word ecosystem all the time, but you start to hear in these stories, it's sort of like peer to peer, we're lifting one another, right? There's access to capital, there's access to graduate students that are interested, right? There's access to courses. there's access to so much that allows you to find, you know, the CEO of your next company, and all these things start to fit together. It doesn't grow with N, it grows with N squared. It really, that's part of why this is so exciting, how rapidly it's developing, right? I'm going to go back to you, Brooke, and one question is sort of, you know, you talked about Berkeley and its comprehensiveness, but maybe you could say a few more words about, you know, when you're making the call on an investment, whether at Berkeley or elsewhere, it's sort of what are the sorts of things you think about most, and maybe sort of some advice on how we make Berkeley even better going forward.
Well, what you heard from these stories from Dave and Jennifer and Steve is that a necessary thing to have in having impact on society is to translate science and engineering and discoveries. But who does that? It's leadership. And I want to talk about that a little bit here, because I think that's one of the special things about Berkeley. So I have a brother, Tom Byers, who was an adjunct professor here in the 1990s. He had gotten his PhD here. Then he went into industry and helped start and build Symantec, a software company. And at age 40, decided he wanted to go back and teach. So he came back to Berkeley, became an adjunct, and he asked around in 1994, how do I learn to teach? And everyone said, go watch Rich Lyons. So he did.
Thank you. Thank you, Brooke.
Now, Rich was teaching economics, and that was before we had phones, laptops, internet, and all that stuff. So he says Rich would come into the class with a newspaper and hold it up and say, here's the news. Now, what's the economics in it? Where's the lesson here? And he would do that over and over again. And you see the charisma and leadership of Rich today, but that's been here forever. And then Rich became dean of the business school for 10 years. And during that period, embraced two key things that I think makes Berkeley so special today. One is the innovation and entrepreneurship culture and thesis and all of that, opening up labs across the campus. Anyone who wants to experiment with something can go into somebody else's lab. That's not done in other universities. So that's fantastic leverage. And the other thing Rich was known as when he was dean was the values dean. And that's a special thing about Berkeley. And the students come here for that. They want to be special. They want to change the world. They want to do it with values. And so I want to acknowledge that leadership. I want to talk a little bit about Dave, because Baker Biolabs over on Shattuck was a dream 6 years ago. There was the Berkeley Art Museum was left behind as the art moved to another building, and there was this big brutalist cement thing over there. And what do you do with it? Well, Dave and some others like Reg Kelly and Rich formed an advisory group. I got to be on it, as did others, and Jennifer helped too. And we created a new model for an incubator. And today it's full of how many startups?
30 at the moment, yes.
30 at the moment. And the ones that have gone through there have raised over $1 billion. And it's a fantastic success. There was not a dollar of university or state or federal money spent on it because, yeah. It was a donation from Barbara Bass Baker, who would be embarrassed if she were here today that I called her name out. But she's in Miami today. And so I warned her I was going to do that. And she told me to tell you she's blushing from Miami. But she also then had that experience here at Berkeley. She also had developed the Baker Fellows and Bioingenuity Hub. But there's more Baker stuff going on over with the IGI, and now new incubators in and around materials and energy. And I talked to Barbara recently, and I said, so you seem to really be focused on Berkeley now. And she says, it's a never-ending opportunity of things to do. There's so much going on there. And I think that says so much about what's here and the leadership.
Thank you for that, Brooke. Thanks for those lovely words. And it's also, it's also part of how philanthropy gets so catalytic. I mean, if you played back the tape to the beginning of that book that you all have and said, what if there were no philanthropic funding to transform Berkeley? I mean, it's absolutely, obviously, faculty and other elements, the human capital in the jargon and so forth. But the catalytic funding philanthropically has been transformative. It really has. Also on the culture side, if you look at, so there's something called the Baker Fellows Program, and that's like commercialization research, translational research. And Paul Olivisatos, when he was here, he was undergrad at Chicago. He went back to Chicago to be president there. That's where he is. But one of the things, Paul started his own companies and was a great scholar. And when they launched this idea of commercialization research funding, it was very new at Berkeley. It was new more widely. But if you actually look at the gift and the charter and the board that runs the Baker Fellowship Program, the first goal isn't let's fund translational research. The first goal is let's change the culture at Berkeley. It's like that kind of intention. That's part of what transforms things. And it's really exciting to see that sort of thing. So a question for you, Steve, looking forward. I want to make sure you have a chance to ask a few questions as well. So last one from me to you, Steve. Looking forward, right, as you sort of think, oh my gosh, yeah, this train is really moving. And you've seen in a lot of universities. It's like, what's next? What does it feel like we're on the threshold of?
Well, which administration? So I do want to make 2 points before I answer your question. One is, and in fact, you all kind of brought it up about the culture of a public university and Berkeley's ethos. One of the things when I was teaching here, I realized, yeah, you could create a great class and you could train students. And we've done a great job in doing that for innovation entrepreneurship. But I wanted to lift all boats. And what happened was I had the opportunity to create multiple national programs. Mm-hmm. So our class at the core of this innovation process became the National Science Foundation Innovation Corps, where we've trained now over 4,000 principal investigators. And then after we started at the NSF, the NIH adopted it in 3 directorates. And then ARPA-E adopted it. This was ground zero for training not only students, but faculty to think about commercialization at scale. After 15 years, I think the NSF, is the NSF still around? It is still teaching that.
That's all the time we have.
The second, Rich, I do want to remind everybody here about why it took Berkeley so long to catch up with Stanford, and I mean that as a positive. Stanford in the 1950s had a professor named Fred Terman, who basically turned the university into an outward-facing university based on their research in the engineering school, which then was predominantly microwave focused because they were funded by the DoD, but the stuff they could face outward was essentially commercial microwave technology. What was Berkeley doing at that time? Well, for 30 years, Berkeley physics and chemistry Nobels, there were 15 of them. But in fact, they were focused inward. Right? Berkeley ran the Lawrence Livermore National Labs building nuclear weapons. That's not something you want to commercialize. Though some countries are trying to do that, it wasn't in our national interest to do so. So we were doing a ton more invention and innovation than Stanford could ever imagine. But the nature of that innovation was focused on national security. That's why we split off Berkeley Lab here, which focuses on mostly non-military applications. And LNL, since 1971, is managed by the UC and not Berkeley. Does that make sense? Yes. And so it took us those many years to kind of realize that, this commercialization thing and innovation thing should also be outward facing, and I'll blame that on you. No, literally starting when I was started here in 2002, I remember the fights when we had stood up our first class. We weren't even allowed to have anybody outside the business school take the class until you showed up and said, well, that's insane. Let's open it to the entire university. So this trajectory of what Berkeley is on, and for me, the other observation, and you've heard part of it tonight, is the world of life science and the world of deep tech almost exist in parallel universes. The VCs are kind of different, the culture's different, the whatever's different, but Berkeley does both spectacularly well. The number of both not only Nobel Prizes, but startups coming out of both those universes are just amazing. I think we're going to see just an acceleration of this. And a couple of you mentioned, how embedded innovation and entrepreneurship is. It's not some other thing. It's now part of our culture in almost every department, every faculty, every whatever. And that's, again, a testament to you and the culture that's been built here that I got to see from the beginning of the last couple of decades. Just an amazing transformation, and it's only going to get better. So congratulations.
Well, very kind of you. Thank you. And I'm not just saying this, they are being way too kind about my role. But anyways, there's so many people that have been fundamental long before I even got into this domain. And it is exciting for me to see it and be part of it. It genuinely is. So let's ask a few questions. If you have, hopefully we can keep them quick. I can hand you the microphone or just repeat your question. But any questions you would like to ask of our panel? Who's ready? There we could. Please, you could speak up. Thank you. Good.
Great presentation, by the way. If you could summarize in just one word, few words, what is the secret sauce that has made Berkeley this champion of startups, this engine of entrepreneurship, engine of economic mobility? What would it be? I've heard Chancellor Lyons refer to this questioning the status quo, being a Berkeley change maker, which by the way is a great trademark registration.
Thank you.
By the way.
Thank you.
What would it be?
Who's the question?
Yeah, I think any of you. I mean, it's just kind of, you get one thing.
So for me, it's the ability to see over the horizon, not only in tech, but in the possibilities of commercialization. And that's kind of new in the last couple of decades for Berkeley, because we always have seen over the horizon in research. And now we've combined that with the ability to see over the horizon with what's possible in building profitable companies and understanding how to do that at scale.
Thank you. Each of you.
3 things from me: people, people, and people.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. The culture here is incredibly collaborative. I think that we're at a university which self-selects for lower than average professor egos. I think the substance is off the chart, but people are willing to be able to, sacrifice a little bit of the limelight, a little bit of the spotlight for greater good. And that is a great way to build a company culture. People are highly collaborative, interactive, because companies are more than just one person, the CEO. It's an incredibly complex system that has to be built and succeed with ideally high morale, high productivity. So I think we naturally have that kind of personality. We self-select for it and we reinforce it.
And my answer is read the book. All right. This book is fantastic. When you get to the last chapter, it's a prescriptive layout of how other universities can try to achieve what we have here. And so I understand that every student and faculty member at Berkeley is getting one of these? Most.
Only the A students.
We have an electronic copy.
All right. Why don't you find some philanthropists who will back that? All right. And then, but I think this is being videoed, and for people in other universities all around the world, get this book and read it and implement it where you are.
Go ahead. Steve.
So I do want to mention Brooke and his entire industry. Innovation and entrepreneurship without risk capital is like one hand clapping. And for decades, venture capitalists in Silicon Valley would maybe go as far as Sand Hill Road and, figured out where Stanford was, but driving up the freeway was like a bridge too far. Seriously, the money has now come where the invention is. And that literally is what powers commercialization and powers it at scale. So thanks to Brooke and Kleiner and the entire industry.
A couple more questions, please. Right over here. Yeah.
Obviously, interesting times in academia, research funding in particular being affected. Do you see this as sort of a unique opportunity in some ways to accelerate what Berkeley's done so well in terms of collaborating with the private sector and commercializing research into companies, given what the broader political winds right now?
Yeah, hopefully everybody heard that real quickly. It's sort of with the threats to federal public research funding, does it create new opportunities to partner with industry even more and perhaps even, multiply some of Berkeley's advantages?
Yeah, well, I mentioned that studies have shown that of FDA-approved drugs, about 55% of them came from academia originally. So, investment in the NIH and in basic research within universities is an investment in the future. So we're very concerned about that. The way I think of it is the sink is very, very much full of incredible innovation now. Again, we've had incredible news at Berkeley this week. We've had incredible news in the recent past couple of years about amazing innovation. But if you turn off the faucet, the sink eventually is going to drain. You're cutting off the pipeline of the innovation that's going into industry. So I think Rich is, I think, a pioneer of thinking about new university models to be able to fund both the university as well as research at the interface between public and private. We've been using Baker Labs as a way to be able to generate in the future, hopefully, funding that will feed back into the Baker Fellows Program and into university basic research. But we're concerned about the NIH as well.
Yeah, and go please, Jennifer. Yeah.
Sorry, Rich. I'll just make one other comment in response to that question. I think companies come to Berkeley for the innovation. That's been our experience. So I'll just give you one quick example from our recent past here at the IGI and Berkeley, and a story that maybe some of you saw made the national news about a young baby in Philadelphia called baby KJ, diagnosed with a metabolic disease. His clinicians reached out to their colleagues here at Berkeley and in the IGI. In real time, they diagnosed the disease, created a CRISPR therapy for that individual, worked with the Food and Drug Administration and several other collaborators across the country, mostly academics, to test that version of CRISPR for the baby and get it into a place where it could be tested and then delivered to the child in about a span of about 8 months. None of that, as wonderful as it was, would have been possible without our partnership with a company called Danaher that makes molecules. And what they do is they make molecules for clinical use. They're looking for ways to apply their technology. And because we had a partnership, they were able to produce the molecule for that boy. And now they're part of a much bigger center that we've just established here in the Bay Area with philanthropic money to treat many more kids. So that's an example where I think, we can continue to partner with companies as we're innovating to make sure that our ideas are getting out into the real world and having real impact in a meaningful timeline.
Yeah, it's a lovely story and a lovely partnership. So I think we just need to take one more quick question, and then we'll mix it up a bit afterwards. Last question here, please. The defining principles, yeah. Yes.
One of the things that always made me really proud to be a Berkeley student was our public mission. Across the Bay, they don't really have that public service mindset. And when we were here with Chancellor Bergeron, we had very great ladders of upward mobility for generational upward mobility. How do we think sort of public service and sort of lifting the lower income as part of the story of Berkeley? Because that's definitely part of what we'd love to sort of hear what you guys have to do to bring it all together.
Thanks for that. I guess that's a question for me, and then I'll take one. Berkeley in the data, we have a faculty member, Emmanuel Sayez is his name in economics, and he's done some work with Raj Chetty. You may know that name. They're economists. And they got like many generations, like 100 years of IRS data anonymized. And they asked the question, when people were in this household income bracket, like at the bottom quartile, and then a generation later they went to college, and a generation later they were in a household and their tax return looked like this. Which universities moved people from the bottom of that stack to the top over literally generations? It's fascinating research. It literally is. And that's the mobility report cards. That's actually one of their papers. And so Berkeley I'm just reinforcing what you said, Berkeley moves people from the bottom quintile to the top few percent more often than any other university in the country. There are lots of different measures of mobility, and you could say, well, that's so, income connected, and it is, but it's very, very good data. But so let me try and answer your question this way. Berkeley's good at that. We're proud of that. So a lot of people don't realize that the whole UC system, including Berkeley, of course, that a third of our incoming class every year, undergraduates, are transfers from the community college system. I mean, that is an awesome thing. And people from other states and other places that don't know Berkeley, and we take it for granted. It's not to be taken for granted, even in the public sector and in other states. So that's a big part of what's going on here. Anyways, let me look forward. Somebody said to me recently, Rich, one of the narratives of our next strategic plan. So Berkeley, many of you have heard me say this before. Berkeley is one of society's most valuable assets. This is a Clark Kerr question. To what use shall we put it over the next 10 years? And if somebody said we're really good at economic mobility, boy, we should be proud and we should tell our story. It's like, it's bigger than that. What if we doubled down on that narrative? What if we said we're going to make Berkeley like 50% or 100% better at economic mobility? Okay? And it's like, ooh. I mean, could a great private university say that? It's like not at the scale they operate. They're not 80% our scale. They're like 20% or 15%, right? And could another public university, anyways, so it's sort of like that. That's the kind of thing you could read in a strategic plan and say, no better place than Berkeley, right? And let me just give you a quick example, because when I hear that, I'm an academic. I think, what are we going to do in the 4 or 5 years that we have them at Berkeley? Here are 2 of the ideas that people have said to me in the last week, because it's like an inspiring container. It generates all these ideas. People bring these ideas. It's like, oh my gosh. Somebody said to me, are you looking at the jobs for recent graduates and how those opportunities are changing because of AI? What if we built a bundle of services for students, low-income students, first-gen students, Pell-eligible students, life and career skills for the 5 years after they graduate? It's sort of like, I thought we were done at graduation. And then this was a conversation with Barbara Baker. I was having dinner with her, and all of a sudden we were saying, if we want our graduates to be as resilient as possible in the era of AI, and you better have an answer to that question in any strategic plan you're writing today, then there's certain traits that you'd like to make sure and capabilities that they have. And some of those traits are pretty hard to teach. We would love to teach curiosity. It's kind of hard. You want to select for curiosity. I'm not saying you can't teach, but if you said curiosity, tenacity, coachability, those are 3 good things if you want to be resilient in the era of AI. So maybe we select for them in admissions. I thought we were talking about the 4 or 5 years of curriculum development. It's like, we're going to transform admissions. And for the first time in the history of this great institution, we get 150,000 applications to our undergraduate program every year. And we can interview every one of them with an AI agent that is trained on tenacity or coachability or curiosity. And because we have more data than anybody else, we will have a better model. Okay, and it's sort of like, but I thought we were talking about curriculum. Sort of like, boom, game on, right? So we could just become an even more powerful economic mobility engine. We're still going through the strategic planning process. I don't know if this narrative or this idea will survive, but there's so many good ideas that are accreting to it that I'm super excited about. Okay, you can stay obviously a little longer. You don't have to leave right now, but I'm going to close on a story just because I'm kind of a nut for stories, and so I'm going to tell this story. And this is a story that was told by one of our own graduates. She graduated from our Rausser College of Natural Resources. Gordon is in the room. And she wrote this, and she said this. This is an undergraduate 3 months ago when she graduated. Let me tell you a story that, to me, is Berkeley. Last summer, I found myself in a remote rural village in Assam, India, while conducting my thesis research on my family's tea farm. One afternoon, I sat beside a tea bush, notebook in hand, listening to the stories of Parvati Mashi, an elder with hands rooted in the soil and decades of wisdom folded into her voice. She asked me where I studied. When I said Berkeley, Mashi leaned in and said, with a knowing smile. Ah, Berkeley. That's where people go to change the world, no? The way her eyes sparkled and her voice swelled with recognition, that moment captured the soul of Berkeley more than any ranking ever could. Because Berkeley isn't just a name, it's a promise. It's the idea that no matter where you come from, you can shape what comes next. Go Bears, thanks for coming tonight. Yeah.